Imagine trying to run a business where the price of literally everything you buy more than doubles in a single year.
Right, which is just a total nightmare scenario.
Exactly. But if you try to double your own prices to match it, all your customers just immediately leave.
Yeah, they just walk right out the door.
So today's deep dive is actually about a traditional telecom giant that faced exactly that. I mean, they dealt with 117.8% inflation, a 27.7% currency depreciation, and yet somehow they still generated over 1.1 billion in core operational profit.
Which is just staggering when you really look at the environment they were operating in.
We're looking at a company walking a very, very precarious economic tightrope here. They are trying to transform from a standard phone provider into a regional tech platform handling everything from cloud computing to digital banking.
Right, and to really grasp the scale of this challenge,
Yeah,
you have to look at the macroeconomic environment of their home country this year.
it was brutal.
Oh, completely brutal. We are talking about an economy where annual inflation hit that staggering 117.8%. Now, by the very end of the year, that rate had decelerated to about 2.7% monthly. But the cumulative damage to consumer purchasing power and just the sheer unpredictability of pricing were already totally baked into the market.
Yeah, the damage was done.
Exactly. But despite that intense volatility, there were actually crucial signs of underlying stabilization. Most notably, the country posted a national trade surplus of nearly 19 billion.
Which gave international investors just enough of a glimmer of hope that the broader economy wasn't completely broken, right?
Yes, and that glimmer of hope became absolutely critical for the company's survival strategy later on.
Because the numbers here tell a really wild story about how inflation distorts business reality. I mean, when you look at their top line, their revenues actually decreased by 7.7%.
Which makes sense because they simply couldn't pass a triple-digit inflation rate onto their everyday consumers.
Right. If they tried, they would trigger unprecedented customer churn. People simply cannot absorb a 100% price hike on their phone bill.
No, of course not. But the bottom line tells a completely different story. Despite that top-line revenue drop, their EBITDA, so their core operational profitability, stood incredibly strong at over 1.16 billion.
Wow, that is massive.
It is. And they didn't freeze their growth initiatives either. Their capital expenditures, the money they're pouring into hard infrastructure and software, reached roughly 806.6 million.
They just kept building.
Yeah, they did. Plus, they managed to distribute nearly 118.8 billion in kind as dividends to their shareholders.
Okay, I always think about trying to grow revenue in a 117.8% inflation environment, like running a marathon on a treadmill that someone just keeps speeding up.
That is the perfect analogy.
Because you're sweating, you're running faster and faster, you're growing your operations and adding subscribers. But the sheer math of hyperinflation just keeps pushing your real revenue backward. How does any company manage to maintain over $1 billion in profit under that kind of suffocating pressure?
It requires a brutal, almost surgical pivot to operational efficiency. When you can't rely on raising your prices, your only lever is looking inward. So they aggressively reduced labor costs, slashed advertising budgets, and clamped down heavily on bad debt.
But you can't just shrink your way to greatness, right?
Exactly. At the exact same time they were cutting costs, they shifted their sales focus toward high-margin digital and business-to-business services.
So getting away from the basic consumer plans.
Right. Think about the unit economics here. Selling complex multi-cloud architectures or cybersecurity software to large enterprises yields vastly better margins than selling a basic prepaid phone plan to a consumer.
Because software scales infinitely better than laying physical fiber optic cable to a single house.
Precisely. By shifting their product mix toward those enterprise services, they protected their profit margins, even as the raw revenue numbers shrank.
That financial balancing act makes the specific hurdles they faced throughout the year much easier to understand. I mean, the inflation and pricing squeeze was clearly a daily battle, but I really want to understand how they actually solved it on the ground.
Well, you have to entirely change the fundamental cost of serving that customer. They leaned heavily into digital self-management and omni-channel support.
Meaning what, exactly? Like apps and chatbots?
Yeah, exactly. Think about what costs a telecom the most money in standard customer service. It's rolling a physical truck out to someone's house for a technical visit. You are paying for the labor, the vehicle, the fuel, the insurance.
Oh, right. That adds up incredibly
It
fast.
does. So by forcing a digital transformation where customers can troubleshoot, upgrade, and manage their own accounts through an intuitive app, they drastically cut those operational costs. They effectively widen their margins from the bottom up without having to aggressively hike prices from the top down.
Okay, so that solves the day-to-day operational bleeding. But their second major challenge was structural. They had an incredibly heavy debt burden.
Oh, massive. High interest rates are a nightmare for any business, but when you combine borrowing costs with the vast capital requirements needed to deploy a national 5G network, you are looking at a crushing financial weight.
So how do you survive that?
They executed an incredibly sophisticated financial maneuver. They issued just over $1 billion in new negotiable obligations, which are essentially corporate bonds. And what is staggering is that they pulled off a massive single issuance of over $816 million within that
Oh,
total.
wait, let me pause you there because the logic sounds completely counterintuitive.
How so?
Well, they are facing a crushing debt burden, so their masterful maneuver is to issue another billion in new debt. I mean, how is that not just kicking the can down the road until the whole thing collapses?
I know it sounds crazy, but not all debt is created equal. There's a profound strategic difference between drowning in short-term, high-interest debt and restructuring your liabilities for long-term survival.
Like refinancing a mortgage, basically.
Yes, exactly like that. If you have a massive balloon payment due tomorrow at a terrible floating interest rate, you are going to default. You will lose the house.
Right, you're done.
But if you can convince a bank to give you a new loan today at a manageable fixed rate spread out over the next 10 years, you use that new cash to completely pay off the immediate threat.
Ah, I see. You still have debt, yes, but you have drastically lowered your monthly payments.
Precisely. You freed up your cash flow so you can actually afford to fix the roof of your house. In this case, the company proactively prepaid and refinanced older, toxic loans, vastly improving their maturity profile.
And the fact that the open market trusted them enough to buy over $1 billion in new bonds is just a huge vote of confidence.
It really is.
Yeah.
It shows they believed in the turnaround.
So they bought themselves time and the breathing room to actually operate. And it turns out they needed that breathing room for a challenge we don't typically associate with telecommunications, which is climate and infrastructure risks.
Yeah, it's an increasingly vital piece of the telecom puzzle. The company explicitly identified extreme temperatures, heat waves, and severe storms as direct physical threats to their network infrastructure.
Because a telecom network is essentially thousands of metal towers and massive heat-generating data centers, right?
Exactly. If a prolonged heat wave knocks out the cooling systems in a centralized data center, or a severe storm topples a major routing hub, the entire regional network goes dark.
And their response wasn't just buying better air conditioners, I assume. There was an actual structural change to how the network operates.
Right, they integrated climate risk scenarios directly into their enterprise risk matrix. From an engineering standpoint, they began shifting toward edge computing.
Edge computing. Break that down for us.
So traditionally, your phone sends a signal to a central server miles away to process data. That centralized hub represents a single point of failure.
Okay, that makes sense.
Edge computing pushes that processing power out to the absolute edges of the network, so putting mini servers right at the base of the local cell towers.
Oh, wow. So it inherently builds network resilience because the infrastructure is physically decentralized.
Exactly. If one tower goes down in a storm, the rest of the decentralized network just continues to function.
You know, if they're decentralizing the physical network to survive, it kind of mirrors what happened with the government rules this year, too. The state essentially decentralized the market.
Yeah, the deregulation of the telecom sector feels like the hinge point for their entire strategy.
Yeah.
It was undeniably a watershed moment for the industry.
Because the government repealed a controversial decree that had previously restricted pricing freedom and stifled open competition, right?
Yes. For a company heavily reliant on infrastructure, regulatory uncertainty is basically poison. When the government lifted those restrictions, it instantly restored predictability to the sector.
Because you cannot forecast returns on a 10-year 5G investment if the government might just arbitrarily cap your prices tomorrow.
Exactly. Deregulation unblocked their long-term planning, allowing them to confidently allocate capital for new investments.
And speaking of capital, we really have to touch on their 30th anniversary on the New York Stock Exchange.
Oh, definitely. They are the only tech company from their home country to achieve 3 uninterrupted decades there.
Which is huge. It's easy to dismiss ringing the opening bell as just a corporate photo op, but in the context of this specific year, it feels like a massive strategic signal.
It really does. It proves to Wall Street that they can navigate chaotic, emerging market economic years while still maintaining the rigorous financial and governance standards required by international investors.
And that global credibility is the exact mechanism that allowed them to successfully sell those corporate bonds we talked about earlier.
Exactly. And that successful debt restructuring, combined with the newly deregulated market, set the stage for the most shocking event of the year. Literally right after the year closed, they finalized a blockbuster acquisition.
Right. They made a roughly $1.24 billion investment to acquire 99.999% of another major mobile
It
operator.
was a massive move.
We just spent the first half of this discussion establishing how squeezed they were by inflation, how revenues were down, and how they were aggressively cutting costs just to protect their margins.
Right.
How does a company operating under those constraints suddenly find over $1.2 billion in cash for a buyout?
Well, if we connect all the threads we just discussed, the irony kind of disappears. It goes right back to the mortgage refinancing analogy. By issuing those bonds and clearing their short-term obligations, they freed up the strategic capital needed to act.
So they essentially created their own luck.
Precisely. The newly deregulated market created this brief, perfect window for consolidation. They realized that organic growth, trying to secure zoning permits, laying fiber, and building their own towers one by one, it would take years they simply didn't have.
So spending $1.24 billion to instantly absorb a competitor exponentially expands their 5G footprint, their fiber optic network, and their customer base literally overnight.
It is an incredibly aggressive play to secure dominant market share while the regulatory window is open.
But instantly doubling your physical infrastructure overnight means you also just doubled your corporate footprint. When you buy thousands of new cell towers and data centers, your power consumption goes through the roof.
Oh, absolutely. Which brings us to their environmental strategy.
Right. How does a company navigating an acquisition of this scale manage the environmental fallout?
The core of their environmental pillar is a roadmap to carbon neutrality by 2050, alongside an interim target to hit 50% renewable energy by 2030.
Okay, but where are they at right now?
Currently, they have secured agreements to cover about 25% of their energy with renewables by the end of this year.
Okay, so they're effectively halfway to their 2030 goal. Securing a quarter of their power from renewables is a solid baseline, but what are the roadblocks to getting to 100%?
The limitations are really substantial. Beyond the high initial costs of transitioning the power grid, there are deep regulatory uncertainties surrounding the broader adoption of clean tech in their region.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, their annual report is very transparent about the fact that they are still struggling to accurately calculate their Scope 3 emissions, which is a really common but critical problem for tech giants.
Yeah, for you listening, if you aren't deep in the sustainability weeds, Scope 3 is the truly difficult metric to track. Scope 1 and 2 are the emissions from the fuel your company burns and the electricity you buy.
Right, the stuff you directly control.
Exactly. Scope 3 is the emissions from your entire extended supply chain. If the factory manufacturing your fiber optic cables on the other side of the world is running on coal power, that actually counts against your Scope 3 footprint.
Which is just a logistical nightmare to audit.
Yeah.
It requires tracking data from vendors who might not even track it themselves.
Unbelievable. Now, moving from the environmental to the social impact, their main highlight is the expansion of free digital inclusion programs.
Yes, in terms of hard implementation, they successfully trained over 10,000 people in technology and digital skills just this year.
I always look at corporate social programs and try to find the underlying business logic. Is training 10,000 people in tech skills purely a philanthropic PR move? Or is there a genuine business risk if a telecom giant ignores the communities it operates in?
Oh, the risk is entirely existential. If a techcom fails to bridge the digital divide, they are literally limiting the size of their future customer base.
Because people who don't understand digital tools aren't going to buy multi-cloud subscriptions or use a digital wallet.
Exactly. More importantly, if they fail to invest in these communities or allow their service quality to slip, their net promoter score drops.
Yeah.
And in a highly competitive, newly deregulated market where consumers can switch providers instantly, losing your public goodwill translates directly into severe customer churn.
So the social programs are, in many ways, long-term customer acquisition and retention strategies.
Without doubt.
That reframes it perfectly.
Right.
And with all this cash flowing, I mean, the billion-dollar bonds, the massive acquisition, the new infrastructure vendors, who is keeping the executives in check?
Governance and anti-corruption measures become incredibly critical in a deregulated environment. Their governance framework is very rigorous.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, they achieved 100% compliance training for all directors and managers in their main markets this year. Even more critically, they embedded 70 distinct anti-corruption clauses into their vendor contracts.
Wow, 70 clauses. So this means if a supplier steps out of line or engages in bribery, the contract is legally voided, shielding the company from liability.
Exactly. Their future focus is actively enforcing those clauses deep into their vast network of over 3,300 suppliers.
That is a massive web to monitor.
It is. But interestingly, the primary risk keeping their governance board awake at night isn't financial corruption. It's actually cybersecurity and data privacy.
Which makes total sense. For a company transitioning into a digital platform handling sensitive corporate cloud data, a breach is a top-level existential threat.
Absolutely.
Looking at this entire strategy, it's like trying to replace the plumbing in an apartment building without ever turning off the residents' water.
That is exactly what it's like.
They are actively greening the power grid, navigating complex supply chain audits, and securing vast amounts of consumer data, all while spending billions to rapidly expand a power-hungry 5G network.
And that dual mandate, expanding their technological footprint at breakneck speed while strictly hitting ESG and governance targets, that perfectly defines their stated objectives for the upcoming year.
So what's priority number one?
Priority number one is integrating that mega acquisition and executing the national 5G rollouts.
Because signing the check to buy a company is the easy part. Merging the operations is where the real risk lies.
Exactly. Integrating a $1.24 billion acquisition involves merging entirely different corporate cultures, aligning redundant IT systems, and migrating millions of users without a single drop in service quality.
Doing that while simultaneously deploying next-generation 5G and fiber optics nationwide will require flawless execution and sustained capital.
It is far and away their most ambitious operational goal.
And priority two really hits on the core identity shift of this deep dive. They're evolving the TechCo ecosystem. They don't just want to provide the internet connection. They want to own the platforms you use on that connection.
Right. They are heavily prioritizing the growth of their fintech digital wallet, which already boasts over 3.6 million active users. That is a highly engaged user base they can monetize through financial services.
What about the enterprise side?
On the enterprise side, they are expanding those high-margin B2B digital solutions. So advanced cybersecurity, cloud architectures, and Internet of Things solutions specifically tailored for vital regional sectors like agriculture.
I want you to consider just how difficult this identity transition is for a brand. They are trying to transition a brand that consumers historically viewed as just, the company that provides my phone signal, into the company you implicitly trust to manage your digital bank account, monitor your home security cameras, and protect your business's proprietary cloud data.
It requires an incredible leap of consumer trust.
Which is exactly why their third priority, advancing climate data and the circular economy, is critical for maintaining that specific trust. Modern consumers and enterprise clients demand sustainable partners.
Yes, they do. They are making it a top priority to solve that complex Scope 3 emissions tracking we outlined earlier. They are also actively expanding their sustainable packaging initiatives.
Really? Like what?
They are already using 70% post-consumer recycled plastic for 1 million of their distribution packages.
That's a huge step. Let's bring all these complex threads together. We've explored aggressive financial restructuring, billion-dollar buyouts, and sweeping technological shifts. What are the core takeaways from this analysis?
I think takeaway one has to be resilience through restructuring. This company didn't just passively survive an economy with 170.8% inflation.
Right. They actively use smart debt issuance, so over $1 billion in new corporate bonds to restructure their liabilities, drastically lower their short-term pressure, and protect their profit margins.
Exactly. Takeaway two is the pivot to platforms. By aggressively focusing on their fintech wallet and their high-margin B2B cloud solutions, they are proving to the market that they are no longer just a traditional telecom utility laying cable.
They are a diversified, high-growth technology company.
Exactly. And takeaway three is expansion meets responsibility. Even amidst extreme economic chaos, they capitalized on the moment the government deregulated the sector to make a massive acquisition of about $1.24 billion, instantly consolidating their market power.
And they managed to do it while locking in a 25% renewable energy baseline for their expanded grid.
Synthesizing all of this leaves us with some fascinating implications for the future. With the telecom sector now newly deregulated, this raises an important structural question. Will their new acquisition eventually spark antitrust and monopoly concerns from regulators down the line?
That's a great question.
Right. Or, given the staggering multi-billion-dollar costs required to build out a national 5G network, is allowing this kind of mega consolidation the only realistic way a country can actually fund its next-generation infrastructure?
That is the ultimate tension between competition and progress. And building on that thought, as they push deeper and deeper into financial services with a digital wallet that already holds 3.6 million users, at what point do we as consumers and Wall Street as investors stop evaluating them as a telecom company entirely and start regulating them as a digital bank?
It's a blur, isn't it? The utility bills you pay might soon be going to your primary financial institution. They haven't just walked across the economic tightrope we started on, they've emerged on the other side as a completely different entity.
The strategic foresight here is remarkable. Watching how they execute this integration over the next 12 months will be an incredible case study in corporate agility.
It really will be.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Untangling these complex business transformations and exploring the mechanics behind the headlines is exactly why we do this.
We'll have another stack of sources and a new strategy to unpack soon, so we hope you'll join us for the next one.